Yes, I think we can start. So, morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you. Uh, Krista will be talking about our Gen 7 servers and how we manage them with our technology, how that all works. And so I'm going to hand that over to Krista. Thank you very much, Krista.
Thanks, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for joining us this morning. Just a heads up, my my voice is starting to go, so hopefully we can make it through this with one person presenting. Otherwise, Mark might have to take over.
No worries.
Yeah, thank you to everybody that took the time out this morning. We appreciate it very much that you join our sessions. Today's session is going to be a little bit more hardware focused, specifically on our Generation 7 servers, the way we manage them, some things to look out for when you are looking to sell them, and at the end of that, we'll have a quick Q&A session. I don't expect this to take too much of your time. But if there's any questions, you can raise your hand, although I won't be able to see the screen. I'm sure Mark and Danny can either help you in the chat quickly or just interrupt me so we can maybe ask that question. But feel free to just put your hand up if you have any questions. Any questions there? Okay, so that's a quick overview of the agenda. Generation 7. It's been available for a while in South Africa for us. But the question is why Gen 7? We still do the Generation 6 servers. They are still mainstream for us, but we find that there's lots of customers that's asking for high performance or specific workload kind of server. So what's the difference and why? So if you remember, in previous conversations and previous demos I've done, I've always told you that the generation number we use, which is Gen 7 in this case, is always one generation ahead of the Intel CPU that's inside of the box, which means that our Generation 7 servers are all grounded on the Birch Stream Generation 6 Xeon CPUs, which can go up to 144 cores per socket. We also support the AMD Turin CPUs up to 192 cores per socket. All of the memory modules that we support are now DDR5 up to 8,800 terabits per second. So very high speed memory. And the reason why we can achieve such high speed is because of PCIe 5, version 5 across the entire machine. The it's two lanes across the chassis that we support with that bandwidth, which means that your high spec stuff like your H100 and H200 GPUs that requires very, very high bandwidth for them to work efficiently is now supported. And the lanes to the motherboard are highly efficient and supports very high speed across it. The other thing that we've done is we're using one chassis for everything. So we've got two silicon paths in terms of one for AMD and one for Intel, and the chassis for those are universal. We do have different sizes. We'll get into that in a little bit more nuts and bolts. Different sizes for different jobs, and sometimes there's a few caveats that you need to be aware of. As you see going forward, that there will be workloads that will be better on certain machines and workloads we advise you to not use for those machines. So there is a few of these machines that are optimized for for certain workloads and that others might not be. So the 4900 has always been our go-to server, right? If you think in terms of HPE, um, if you think of HPE, you think of a DL380. It's just one of those things that just jumps to mind because they sell more of those than anything else, right? In our case, that is true as well. So we lean on our 4900 for a lot of things. First, sorry, sorry about that. First of all, it's the building block of our hyperconverged solution, the building block for our cloud solution, and everything that goes with it. So it's safe to say that um, this is the most general compute variant of what we have. So with the new CPU range available to us, we can support up to 288 cores per box, which, as you know, the 4900 is a two CPU box. So that gives us a total of 288, and it can take 32 memory modules. Now, 32 times 256 gig modules is not only very big, but right now it's very expensive. We all know the price of memory is through the roof at this point in time, but at the end of the day, it is a machine that can scale massively. Okay, so something else to remember there is that we do have PCI 5 across the entire machine. Okay, which means our riser cards supports PCI 5, and all the cards that you put into the PCI cards also is passed through for PCI 5. So this typically gives us enough space to put four dual slot GPUs into the system. That's typically the very wide cards. And we support liquid cooling across the platforms. By the way, every version of the Gen 7 server has a liquid cool variant. For some of our partners or our disties on the line that use our config tool, when you go and spec a Generation 7 server, one of your options would be either air cooled or liquid cooled. So be on the lookout for that, because there's a big drive when it comes to liquid cooling into the data centers. Air is notoriously inefficient when it comes to um, to cooling systems. What we found over the years is that, and for those of you that's been in a data center recently and has been in the data center for a very, very long time, 10, 15 years ago, you'll find that the data center are very much warmer than it used to be. Back in the day, if you had to sit and install a server in a data center, you would sit there with a jacket and a blanket if you could get one in there, because it was extremely cold in there. Today, they run data centers at about 14 degrees, which isn't all that cold. And that is purely because of the cost of energy. Cost of energy is only going up. I've never ever experienced a situation where Eskom announced that they are going to drop the price of electricity. That has never happened. I think that is the day that hell will freeze over. But so there's different ways for us to address this, and for us, because liquid cooling is a targeted solution. It basically targets just the heat spots in the server that needs to run optimum. It is a much cheaper and easier way to cool things. So these principles applies to all of our machines. I took a little bit of time just to sit on that one, but please understand that all the Gen 7 servers has got a liquid cooled option. Now you can see there on the slide, it says there it's 96 power efficient, 96%, which is extremely high. It's very, very high. It means the amount of BTUs you have to put in order to get the same amount out has come down drastically, which leads to quite big savings. Okay, the 4700, which is the cousin of the 4900. It is basically the 1U version of the 4900 server. This can also take 2 by 144 cores, which keeps us a 288 cores as well. It also takes 32 DDR5 DIMM RAMs. We can put MR DIMMs in there, but then only half, but the speed then doubles, right? We can go to 8,000 mega TS per second. It has 4 slots, PCIe slots. 3 of those will be PCI 5, and the other one will then be a normal PCI 4 slot. So you can see that this workload kind that you would start putting onto this machine is already different from what we had on the 4900. We have 2 OCP slots. You have to have both CPUs enabled for you to use both those OCP slots. For those of you that don't know what the OCP slot is, it's the onboard slot that you can use for network cards, and now you can use it for mezzanine storage controllers, etc. But if you want to use both of those cards, you need to populate the box with both CPUs. Now, this is not a server that we would suggest for any GPU or anything that has to have GPU power in it, because of the slim line of this box. The real estate in there is already extremely packed. It's a small footprint, but we stick a lot of things into it. What's worth noting is that we can now take 12 2.5-inch drives, where the previous version only supported 8 2.5-inch drives. And then we can put 4 3.5-inch drives in there, but we can also use the new form factor, which is U2 or E3.S, which is basically the size of a NVMe 480. If you've ever seen a NVMe drive, the drive is this, what we're talking about, is slightly bigger, just a centimeter or so wider, and then we can pop these into the server, which makes them extremely quick. When we do this, you don't need a controller card because they connect directly onto the motherboard. If you want to run a RAID across it, then you would have to put a VROC, which is virtualized RAID over on chip. So bearing in mind that the real estate in this is much smaller, but this is a typically you would run this in a highly virtualized environment, because if you want to offset storage to a SAN using fiber channel or iSCSI or distributed storage or whatever the case may be, you don't need all that disk in that one machine. You can actually offload that to a separate storage device. Right, so the 4950, if we think about the 4900 and the 4950, the difference between the two is in the CPU architecture. So anything with a 50 behind the model number for us denotes that it is an AMD variant of the box. So we support the 9005 or 9005 EPIC series of CPUs, and those can go up to 192 cores per CPU, which gives us a total of 384 cores per box. So a lot of horsepower packed into a 2U device. We give you 10 PCIe 5 slots for GPUs, network cards. We support all the way up to 800 gig network cards now. So the 400 gig network cards typically would take up PCI 5 slots to give you all that throughput. So it's basically the brother of the normal 4900 that we all know and use. But you'll find that the speed when we use the AMD chips, the speed of the memory is slightly lower at 6400, whereby we can go up to 8800 on the Intels. Now, this is typically where where cloud providers would play. They are not really interested in the speed of the memory because at cloud level it doesn't make that much of a difference. But you're looking for core density, then this is the go-to box. It supports 28 of those U2 NVMEs we discussed earlier, which means all 28 those disks connects to the motherboard, no controller card needed, and it's blazingly quick because of the direct channels that's available to the CPUs. We can put 41 2.5-inch drives into this machine, right? So if you take into account the best we could do previously was 25, 26, 20, 28 disks. This is a massive upgrade in terms of drive capacity. Or we can run up to 20 times 3.5-inch drive. So now we're talking about a mid-plane, front plane, and a back planes where we can put disks into. And this also supports 4 double width GPUs, or as it says there, the single width, which we don't see a lot of these days. It's more the double width ones. Okay, I will come to the big boys, the 6900 G7. That's a 4U 4-socket machine. We see it as our flagship. It is for where you seriously have outgrown 2 CPUs, and it's typically for very, very big databases that we still see these servers in production. We don't see many of them because they are becoming quite specific and quite unique from a workload perspective. The highest number of cores we support per socket in this case is an 86 core. So we can't put 144 core Intel CPU 4 of in this box because we just don't have the power envelope to do that. But if you fill it up with 86 cores, you get a 344 physical core wide system. So what do we use this? What do we use this for? Large databases, big data, something that needs to be very, very close to the PCI bus. Typically not for virtualization. It would be more from a hard or a bare metal perspective. So we support up to 50 drives in this machine. Now, that's quite a bit if you consider that we're running a dual stack motherboard, right? Because we have the motherboard at the bottom with 2 CPUs, and then we stick a riser board on top of it for the other 2 CPUs and the memory that goes into it. So to fit another 50 drives into this machine took quite a bit of engineering. So you'll see all the machines have one thing in common. We've taken the density and we've just jacked it up to the max. So that is true for this machine as well. Right, the 43U, this is our storage optimized server. It's typically what we use for our distributed storage for one store, or we've seen a lot of these go out as backup servers where we sell you the server, you create a RAID, and you install the backup software of your choice on it, whether that be Veeam or Veritas or whatever you want to use, and then make those drives available as as a repository to do your backups to. So it's typically a 2 CPU box, but it can take about a whole bunch of drives. So we've got 56 drives in this current box. 44 of those will be 3.5-inch drives. Four of those will be 2.5-inch, and then we also have 18 NVMe U2 bays, which sits in the back of the server. From a PCI perspective, there's 10 PCI 5 slots, which gives you the ability to go up to 5 GPUs in this machine. So not only a lot of storage, but a lot of expansion slots to put other things into it, whether that be fast network cards, fiber channel cards, Mellanox, low latency networking, whatever you can think of. This box is used for that. But because it can take so much disk and it stacks so nicely, we use it for storage most of the time. Right, then we have a 3350. It's a very nifty little box. This is typically where you want to put a server down that it only has one CPU, but it must have quite a bit of cores, which means we can actually put one of these down and get a 192 core server. Okay, and this is backwards compatible with the Genoas. So if you still get the older version of the AMD CPUs, we can actually use them. The reason for that is they didn't change the socket. The socket is the same spec as it is for the Turins and for the Epics. So very nice machine, 2U box, which means we can put quite a bit of hard drives into it. As you can see, about 20 U2s if we want to do that. But we can also configure that with a with normal 3.5-inch drives, which can give us an option up to 36 drives. If we add them all together, we go to 44 drives. That's a combination of SATA, SAS, and the NVMe drives. Okay, also comes with 2 OCPs. This is the only server that you don't need dual CPUs for both of the OCP slots to work. You can just use them. They are both available. And then there's 10 PCIe cards in there, 5 cards, which means we can also go up to 5 GPUs. You can typically see that this box will start fitting into more of the AI workloads. Don't need all that CPU power, all that operating system power, but the GPUs becomes important in your system. Then this is the kind of box that you would need. Okay, then the big boy. This is pretty much where most of our new, how can I put it? Our new technology went into this. And a lot of people are asking for this. It's our AI or GPU server, which is the 5300 range, right? So it's based on the Granite Rapids, all right, up to 86 cores. Again, that is not its main job. This is there to give you as much graphical GPU slots and ports that's available. So there is, if we can basically use 2 86 core CPUs, and this can take a maximum of 8 terabytes of memory. Okay, and it has 32 slots also available for memory. So we take that across 256 gig modules, then we top out at 8 terabytes, and that memory is typically will run at 64 MTs. Okay, this can take a maximum of 8 GPUs, right? So lots of GPUs we can put into it, and because we've got running those across PCIe 5 throughput, we can guarantee maximum transfer rate of that. It supports 16 hot swappable bays, 2.5-inch. So again, a lot of real estate packed into one server, quite a bit of storage, loads and loads of memory, and then the ability to put graphics cards into this to really turn the conversation towards a AI geared device. Um, this is nothing new, but it's taking off in a big way. Because as we see and as we know, AI also coming up massively. I don't think all the people understand exactly what AI is or what it does, but everybody wants it. So I'm just going to pause here for a moment. I want to have a drink of water. If there's any questions, maybe we can just field them now quickly.
No questions posted in the Q&A, Krista. So when you're ready, you can continue.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mark. All right. Let's just get this going. Okay, so
Krista, sorry, we do have a question. Just hold on. Please post your questions in the Q&A section, please. It says, how many RTX 600s can this take? RTX 6000s. In the previous one, would you even put RTX? Yeah, you would put RTX 6000s or even A6000s in the.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yes, you could put 8. So if you look at it, you'll see that it means full height, full length. That is what that means. FL, which is full height, full length. So if you have the if you know what the card looks like, and it's a double height, double length, full height card, then you need to halve the amount. If it's double width, if it's a single width card but it's full length, then you'll be able to take 8 of them. And note the power usage is 700 watt each, because remember we need to power these off the PCI bus now. Okay, I hope that answers that question. Right, so if we look at it, that's the range we discussed. We've got the 3900. We're still finalizing that. This is coming through. We've got the 3750, which will also be a 1U machine, which is coming through. That's basically the baby brother of the 3950, which is that one CPU. Blade servers, yes, we do manufacture them. Are we going to bring in blades for Generation 7? We might not. We've seen some papers come through and say that blade is basically end of life, and that form factor will be discontinued. And the reason for that is that we can now fit more resources into a 1U machine than we could on a blade. Blades have a unique problem whereby the power envelope goes too big. Now, because a blade server has a blade and a chassis and a midplane, all the power that goes to the blades needs to go through the midplane. So when you plug 16 blades into a chassis, we have to power all 16 those blades through the actual midplane, which means we have to use thicker copper in order to do that. And you get to a point where we just cannot do that anymore. It doesn't become financially sustainable to do that anymore. So therefore, we've now reached that sweet spot, that pivot point where a 1U machine can now do a lot more than a blade. So blade chassis are typically 12 U's. If we take the maximum amount of compute we can put into a 12U blade chassis, we can pretty much fulfill that with 6 1U servers now. So the scale doesn't make sense anymore. Okay. I know there is people that still uses blades, so if there is questions around that, I'll be happy to field those. Okay, so how do we manage this? How do we manage all this? Right. So as you may or may not know, our version of iDRAC or iLow is called HDM. we have now upgraded HDM to version 3. And that is basically our out of bound management console. So, as I said, ILO, IDRAC, out of bound management solutions, right? So we have um, the baseboard management controller, BMC, is onboard controller. It's 100% self-deployed, self-developed. Every single service ships with it built in, and there's no separate license for that for the base feature set. Now, I want you to just look at that. There's no separate license for the base feature set. This is the first version of HDM that we have split into two. The previous versions of HDM was all the feature sets are for free. We now have a very small licensed version, a very small licensed feature that we added, and that's got to do with the way that we do RAID. Now, previously, you could use HDM and create RAID in your system, um, whether that be VROC or array controller based. Going forward, that is a licensed feature, but it costs a fraction of, it's peanuts. It's not a lot of money, or you still have the option to go into the BIOS and create your array in the BIOS. That is still 100% free. We don't penalize you for that. Okay, so with the evolution of the CPUs, we had to evolve our HDM as well, because there's new instructions, new sensors, new things happening in the CPU that we had to account for. And also the way that we are upgrading and keeping the machines current changed. So we uh, we still redfish compliant. The other thing that we added to the boxes is previously when you wanted to run iFirst, you had to actually buy the software. Now it's included into the product. We'll get to that. We'll get to that a little bit later. But what do we use HDM for? Monitoring, diagnostics, remote access upgrade, and obviously security. Okay, so we have features in HDM. It pivots on 5 different pillars. We'll get to those, and I've mentioned them. I've mentioned monitor, diagnostics, and so on. We'll get to each one of them a little bit more in detail. I'm not going to go all the nuts and bolts, but gives you a good idea of what's going on. So the first thing is the automatic fault identification, because everything in the machine talks to the HDM power supplies, the fans, and all the sensors on the motherboard, those CF sensors, they all talk to HDM. HDM is the first thing that is going to flag a failure. If there is a PSU failure or we see a predictive fault on a piece of storage, then it will flag you. Um, it runs continuously, so it's not something that you need to enable or disable. It is always on. When you start the machine up, the first thing that boots actually is the actual HDM. And then from then on, everything is managed, monitored from that perspective. The other thing that it really gives us, but this is something I've seen that other vendors short, is proper device identification. If you have a card plugged into that device, into a PCI slot, and you're not sure what the model of that card is, HDM will give it to you right down to the chip number. Very, very detailed. Gives you an exact description of what's in that slot. Um, this makes fault finding a lot easier. It makes replacing parts or upgrading parts also a lot easier. So very, very nice feature to have. And then obviously because you know where the problem is, the resolution in terms of fault, the turnaround time in terms of fault is much, much, much quicker. Okay, it is out of bound, so it sits on a different network card. It has its own dedicated ports, but it also takes up, if you put a 1 GB four by one gigabit OCP card into the machine, then slot number one or port 0 will then become what we call the shared interface. So you could run one on your internal network, your production network, and you could then run another one in your out of bound or your management network. The beauty about this is if you do have a failure of your management network, you could still get to the server going through your backup or your shared IP address. So what does it give us? It gives us full console access. This is typically where ILO does not play well. If you run ILO and the moment the machine boots, then you have to apply a license. We give you full control over the machine. You don't have to worry about that license. We give you virtual media, which means you can mount an ISO file, do a remote installation. Virtual power buttons to switch on the server, switch off the servers. There's also an option inside of HDM where you can go and physically disable the power button on the machine, which is very cool if you're hosting. Somebody can't, just lean on the machine and accidentally switch off the machine because you can actually just disable that power button. And we've got a HDMI or HDM mobile app that you can remotely log into servers or check them, get notifications, etc. Okay, the security that's built onto the management chip, role-based access. You can have multiple users, giving them multiple roles or specific roles to do certain things. Because it is hardware, the risk is mitigated to the point where there's no software that you need that could get hacked. Think of it as the silicon of trust. I think that's what HP calls the silicon root of trust. Yeah, that's what they call their version of the BMC security. We've taken the exact same thing going forward. Certificate monitoring extremely reliant, because the moment something on the certificate changes, we drop the connection and we will kick that off. And then we've got a virtual firewall that's built into the actual management console as well. So things like DDoS or something originating from inside, in the case of a hack or a breach, that would be taken care of by the firewall. Right. It also gives us the ability to do the firmware and the upgrades. If there is a firmware upgrade for a server, we can automate that, give it a time. You download the repo package, basically, a repo extension. You add it to the RAID or the NIC, and you look for the new firmware, and you can then say, okay, go for it. When we use something like Unisystem that we'll get to now, we can do a bulk and say, okay, do 50 servers at one time for me. And then it will take care of upgrading the firmware on the cards, the network cards, the firmware on the actual motherboard, the BIOS, all of that will be taken care of. We make a copy of everything before we actually do the installation or the upgrade. So if there is a current version of firmware running, we will make a copy of that firmware before we put the new firmware on it. So there's a rollback plan. The same goes for the BIOS. And even the HDM hardware now, or software now and again, needs to be updated. And if you do take the option with a front panel LCD, then the software for that is part of that upgrade. All right. So as I said, one toolkit, three things. Sorry, guys. Right. So the product actually that handles all of this is a product called FIST or iFist. Now, FIST is enabled and it's on chip out of the box on every one of our servers. If you boot the machine up and you go to the boot options, you'll have an option to press iFist and boot into the iFist. It is a separate chip that sits on the motherboard, and it contains these toolkits that we have just discussed, HDM, and all the extensions to the other ones we are going to discuss, right? So think about it like this. When you have a operating system or a hypervisor loaded on the machine, and we see the fan speed of that specific machine in the hypervisor, that information has to come from somewhere. And first is what does this? First is the product that pulls all these things together and give us a unified view of what is going on for the rest of the machine. So think of it as enhancing HDM, what we just discussed from a management perspective, but now also from a reporting perspective. This gives us the ability to do an upgrade, for instance, on firmware of 5,000 boxes in one go. Okay, so we can when we put Unisystem on top of this, we have now got fleet scale management. We're not just talking about a cluster. We're talking about campus-wide multiple hypervisors sitting in multiple regions on multiple servers, multiple racks. Okay, and then Unisystem is the ability to pull all these information together and give us one holistic view of what's happening across the entire real estate. Couple that with the fact that you could set up custom alarms, custom notifications, it becomes a central management, hardware management tool. We take it one step further with the SMS portion that is actually running inside of the operating system. When we install a CAS server, for instance, and we run CAS tools, a portion of that software reports the status, the services that's running in the operating system to the hypervisor, which in turn takes that and reports all of that back to Unisystem. So if you have a virtual machine that's hung, you don't have to go to the virtual machine or try and log into the virtual machine. You can just click on the virtual machine and look at the services and say, oh, we have an instance of Firefox sitting in this virtual machine running at 100%. Click on it, end the task. So we start interacting now a lot more with the actual operating system on the server as well. Makes management an absolute breeze. Okay, as I said, it's embedded on the box. There's no separate install or license needed for it. It handles the OS installations. This is hardware device configurations, which means if you've got a 15 service and you need to install, I don't know, Windows 2025 on all of them, we can you give it the repo, download the repo, you give it a script, and we can deploy all 25 servers in one go. We want to do it with CAS, it is exactly the same thing. So it could work as standalone. The moment we add Unis system on it, it becomes a more of a feathered approach. Okay, I touched on this already. You can see the add-ons on the OS performance and monitoring on HD. So HDM, as I've mentioned, cannot see the OS performance, but if we add the SMS agent in it, then we can see exactly what's happening inside of the operating system. So I've touched on this. I'm just breaking it down quickly. Okay, right. So there you go. If you look at Unisystem, 5,000 servers, 30 switches, and 128 infrastructure devices in one console. And it takes care of the 5 pillars that we discussed earlier. It takes care of the deployment, the tuning, energy saving diagnostics, and the retirement. So not only is it a tool that you can use for maintaining, it's also a lifecycle management tool. Okay, so if there's anything that is end of life in your system, it will get flagged, and then you will be able to replace those proactively. So it won't wait for the warranty to expire, or the hardware to become end of solution before it will actually tell you that what needs to happen there. We do integrate to other platforms. So there's SCOM, there's Virtual Center. I mean, there's a lot. Nagios, REST, and it's all done via RESTful APIs. So we pride ourselves on the fact that we are an open standards company, and the fact that we have RESTful APIs just proves that point. Okay, breakdown what I just said. Data center wide management platform. Um, it extends the support and the monitoring capabilities way beyond running just on the premise, and it integrates with RESTful APIs into other platforms as well. And then the full life cycle, so we can very quickly look at what is inbound, what is outbound, what is in warranty, out of warranty, maintain the warranties if that's what you need to do. We use HDM3 for the diagnosing for security and upgrading the individual service, and then we can diagnose and look for things that are proactively going to go wrong. There's a hard drive in there that's failing. We have a memory module that's misbehaving, dropping frames or whatever the case may be on a networking card. So it's a complete life cycle story. Right. So selling it. What do you look for? I alluded to this a little bit earlier. The general compute, as I said, the 4900 is our building block for pretty much everything. The 4700 is the smaller version of that, but it has less space for expansion in terms of cards. We look at storage solutions, the 4300 and the 3350 Gen 7 gives you a lot of storage for very little real estate. The AI GPUs, the 5300, is exactly what we were talking about earlier. That is, if we're looking for very, very high density in terms of cards, available PCI slots, and also if you need a lot of networking. And then obviously with fleet operations plan, that is very simple. Our HDM and Unisystem takes care of that. Right. So this is something I was between leaving this slide, taking it up, and at the end of the day, I thought, okay, let's leave it in there. I know I am culprit to this, and this is pretty much why I wanted to take it out, but thought, no, let's introspect. So we try and use H3C's own terms in discussions going forward. And it's just about discipline and building a brand and building the names, bringing the names into the market so people realize and recognize HTC product. I gave you an example to say HDM is like ILO, which is good for a comparison, but we're not into vendor shaming either. So we never say it's better than iDRAC or better than ILO. The difference between iDRAC and ILO and us is the fact that we don't have a license associated with it. That doesn't mean the product is better. It's just we're giving you something that you don't have to pay for. It compares to, right? It compares to ILO, it compares to iDRAC, and we don't want to get into a spec war. It's also why we're not keen on doing like for like configurations. If you get a Dell config and you send us a Dell config and you say, give me a like for like on that config, the only thing I can give you is a red apple for a red apple. But I don't know if the customer really wants a red apple. He might want a green pear. So we would like to engage the customer and not get into a spec war, but rather understand the customer's need. So we can take the products that we've just given you and align them to what the customer actually needed. Because when I get that spec for Dell or for HP or whatever the case may be, I have no idea if that, you might also not have any idea if that spec is over or under spec. So by passing the spec on, we could potentially pass the problem on of under or over specking. So we want to engage with the customers to understand the need. As you can see from the slide decks that we just did and the products, we don't have a lot of product. It's not 1,000 SKUs, but we can align to pretty much any problem that your customer may have. I'm looking for AI. Well, we have a box for that. I'm looking for something that can take a lot of storage. Yes, we have a box for that, right? And the way we want to align that is to give the customer a solution based on its needs, not based on what another vendor has given you, because that might not always be the right thing. So that's just a request on our side. Well, where to get help? If you need help, we've got two distributors at this point, guys from Knowledge and Tarsus, and then from ourselves, right? So we've been having these sessions for a long time, and I think if everybody should have our contact details or our email addresses, and we are always happy to assist. Whether that be a quick call to just discuss a config, or even do a demo on CAS, or do a demo like this for your customer based on the product spec, we are always happy to assist with that. And that's it. Thank you on behalf of Mark, myself, Danny, for joining. And remember, we're always there to assist you guys.
Thank you so